Okay, so this is the video that taught me that it doesn't look good if you do all of your voices in a shirt with stripes on because it messes with the lines of your video. So, lesson learned. I'm not gonna make videos with stripes on my shirt anymore because I don't like the look of it. It's aesthetically muddled. In any case, this is gonna be Nanobot. So this was a video that I got funding from the University of Manchester. There's a guy named David Lee there who runs a like nanorobotics lab, who hooked me up with some funding to make a video. And he was like, "Hey, do you want to make a video about nanobots?" And I was like, "Oh my god, yeah, that sounds great." And then it took me a whole heck of a lot of research, because to figure out what it was. And so like what I ended up focusing on was like on one hand, I kind of limited myself because there's like people talk about nanobots that are larger scale than the ones that I'm talking about here. Here I'm really talking about molecular robotics, or like molecular machines. Like will talk about nanobots at like the 100 nanometer scale, where you can have like nano dot structure, like like fullerene structures with things inside them, or like little capsules and whatever. Um, but this is like way down at the at like the floor level of like basic, like turning basic molecules into little machines. And that kind of question of like, how do you do that? And uncovering that question is also at the same time uncovering what is going on inside of your body, because like all the chemistry you learn in chemistry classes is it's equilibrium chemistry, right? You throw some things together and you do a bunch of stuff, but then you wait until they get to like an equilibrium where nothing's really happening anymore, for the most part. And or even if it's not, it's like a very it's like a process towards equilibrium that maybe you shut off after a certain point, and then you go on and you make your reactants and whatever. But what your body does is chemistry that never reaches equilibrium. If you reach equilibrium, you're dead. That's what happens when you die, is that your body now can approach chemical equilibrium, which is that you decay, right? Well, like decay is a whole other thing, but just like everything, all your processes stop going. So all of your body is chemical processes that are keeping themselves fueled by an outside source of entropy, essentially. Like it's not energy isn't the bottleneck. Entropy is the bottleneck. Energy is not being created or destroyed, but what is in short supply is low entropy energy. So real concentrated energy, because any thermodynamic process is going to take concentrated energy, and it's gonna do some work with it, and with that work, it's gonna diffuse it in some way that you're never going to get it back. And the reason why that's the way all processes work is that everything is processes like that, and there are more ways to be disordered than ordered. So any order you get is going to tend towards disorder. So this is the challenge of the human body, is that we're processes that have to go in cycles so we have to keep our disorder at a fixed rate while simultaneously essentially pooping out disorder all the time and absorbing order. So what we do is we absorb, high energy, or like high concentration, high order energy. Well, plants absorb it from sun photons, which are, there's like a whole big packet of energy in one photon, and they store it in their cells and whatever. And then we eat that, and then we diffuse that energy and we release it as photons as well, just infrared photons. And most of our energy is released as heat. And we release about 10 times as many photons. Like life as a whole on the planet releases about 10 times as many photons as it absorbs. So it absorbs high energy light and it emits low energy light, which then goes back into space as infrared. Hopefully, unless you've got a greenhouse effect, in which case it bounces back and then you heat up your planet. And that's what we're worried about with climate change. So that's the challenge. How do you actually, that's the large scale, but how do you do that on a molecular level? What are the tricks? So we have a few. That we use in our cells, and many of them have been replicated now in little chemical machines. So I'm going to show you that. Yeah, let's do it. This is Havana, the song Havana by Camila Cabello. Fun song. Second song with Camila Cabello that I did because Work From Home was, she was the actual, I dare say, the actual good member of Fifth Harmony who went on and had a career. very Santana vibe, isn't it?
To plan a nanobot.
So this is Dorothy. Lucky enough to get a lead singer for this that wasn't me because I can't do Camila Cabello. I met Dorothy. Dorothy was actually started off kind of as a fan of mine, who happened to live in Montreal and messaged me like, hey, like I am super into science and music too, and I'm in this choir. Would you like to come and see our choir perform? And I'm now in that choir. That's a great. She's not anymore. She's moved away, but I'm like that's now my choir, which is pretty cool. And she's also just like she's got a fantastic voice and like a really good like camera presence, and so when I thought of this, I was like, hey Dorothy, you want to come and hop onto Nanobot and be my Camila Cabello, because I'm certainly not going to do it. And she was happy enough to oblige, and here we go. Yeah, I think she pulled it off pretty well.
Map out the molecules to span the nanobot.
Okay, so this little Nanobot character, this is my first time using, there's this, Adobe has this little thing called Character Animator, which is like allows really simple, like sort of like puppetry rigs to be set up for little characters, and you can get it. So you can actually have it like motion tracking your head and stuff to like give it realistic movements and facial expressions and stuff. So like a lot of this when this Nanobot is moving, like it's like head and body motions. Those are like motion capture from a webcam that's feeding into Adobe Character Animator, and then the arms you have to do by themselves. So there's a whole bunch of you can do them really slowly, but you actually have to kind of puppet them in real time, which is kind of tricky.
To span the nanobot. Add on the motors used to man the nanobot. Signals to talk with the commander. Software and logic scrambler. Programmed in nanobot. Beginning you.
Okay, so that's kind of the setup, right? It's like what do you need to make a body type thing? Well, you need a structure, you need a skeleton. Like this kind of analogizing what you need. You need a skeleton, and then you need something to move the skeleton, and then you need something to control the skeleton. And in us, it's our skeleton and muscles and brain, nervous system. We're gonna see how we get that with nanobots. Also, this took a very long time to figure out how to get these things hooked up to the inside of this rigged puppet.
Software and logic scrambler. Programmed in nanobot. Beginning you better control the movement.
The thermal stormer.
Temperature systems are always moving.
Your system's moving.
So yeah, so down at this scale of like a molecule like this is like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 6 carbon atoms long. There's like a couple nitrogen and sulfur groups and oxygen and whatever. Down at this scale, the problem with putting machines at this scale is that at room temperature, everything is like buffeting this thing this way and that, like it's in the middle of a hurricane. Like the problem is like when you see those little, I've talked about this before, but when you see those animations of, like inner life of the cell or whatever, where you've got like a microtubule and then there's like a kinesin protein that's doing this nice like walking motion along the microtubule. I don't know if you've seen that video, or those kinds of animations, but you've probably stumbled across them on Twitter or something. Like they always make it look like a very mechanistic process, like detach, reattach, detach, reattach, detach, reattach, like, like a walker in Star Wars or whatever. But really what's going on is that like at the level of molecules and at the level of those proteins, there's so much jostling and just like everything going everywhere that it's all really thermodynamic, like semi-random processes. So you're going to have your foot, like if you've got a little walker, you've got your foot stuck in one place. There's some probability of it getting like pulled off and it'll like flail around. But then you can get an entropically favorable process where like if you get an ATP coming in the right way, it changes its configuration such that now it's a little more likely to step to the next one because you've changed something in the protein or whatever, than to step back. And so if you actually looked at these walkers, they're going all over the place. They're super jostly and crazy, but like statistically over time, a bunch of them will move in the right direction and do what you want. And that's just how you got to do it with nanorobotics, unless you want to go down to like, microkelvin kind of, or maybe not microkelvin, but like really low temperatures. And so that was something that I had to figure out how to animate here. And I sort of went through various stages over the course of the video. Like in this one, I think I'm actually trying to wiggle each molecule separately still. I gave up on that pretty quick. You'll see how later on I sort of make these things get less realistically wiggly as I had to find shortcuts.
Pieces and links you pick will limit.
The states in Canada.
Okay, so these are 3 different molecular machines, and they're different. Most of these are either there's a few big names in molecular robotics, several of which have won the Nobel Prize, and I can't remember which ones of these are which. Although I believe that I actually have like numbered sources in this video, so we could actually go and look at each one of these. You can actually go look at each one of these papers where it comes from. But you're gonna see this is a little walker. This one is made by Ben Feringa and his team. It's a little circular motor, and then this is called a catenane. So a catenane is like a macromolecule structure where you've got a ring on a ring on a wire, essentially, and that allows you to have a little one-dimensional track that you can do lots of stuff here. Dorothy does look very concerned on this pause. Like, Tim, what are you doing?
It'll randomly shuffle through them.
Oh no! This is a rotaxane, right? So a catenane is 2 interlocking rings, and then a rotaxane is 1 ring on this, but trapped on a wire because there's these balls at the end. Yeah. So if you want to see more about any of these things, there should be a bunch of sources in the links in this video.
Now force it with the right fuel.
Okay, so here's different sorts of fuel that you can have. You can either, like, if you've got to, like I said, you have to have some sort of low entropy, highly concentrated energy to power any little machine, just like any big machine. So you've got options. You can have
Now force it with the right fuel.
you can have like just electrons. Some of these things just work by hitting them with electrical current, and that like voltage is enough to get them moving in a specific direction. Then you can have more complicated chemicals. So this is ATP. This is what our cells use. Adenosine triphosphate. So this is adenosine, and this is the triphosphate. In your body, your body reuses this molecule by having it convert. What usually happens is it'll attach to some protein complex and break off one of its phosphate groups, which releases energy, and then it'll break off again and float around, and then get brought back inside of a mitochondria, and that'll use energy to reattach the phosphate group to the end, and the cycle continues. It's like recharging. You can think of taking the phosphate group off is like spending a battery, and then putting it back on is like charging the battery again. This is a higher energy molecule than if they're separated. And then you can also just have light, right? Like light is a great source of high energy and or high entropy, low entropy energy. It's so hard to keep it straight. Entropy is one of those things that I really wish they named it in reverse, because to me it feels like high order should be the high thing. It's the more intuitive, like high order, high entropy. But instead it's high order, low entropy, low order, high entropy. And so you have to say, you have to talk about harvesting negative entropy, or people sometimes say neg entropy, which is just confusing. It's one of those things where I feel like the sign conventions should really be flipped, like how electrons should be positive, and everything would make a lot more sense.
Energetic, a bias in the setup.
Yeah, so you need you basically need a reservoir of high entropy, of low entropy, and then a dumping ground of high entropy where you can push it, and then thermodynamics will favor a flow of energy. Like if there's a temperature gradient, say, it'll favor a flow from high temperature to low temperature, or this could be like high or chemical potential to low chemical potential, or whatever. If you put a little robot in the middle and you force these, these little energetic units to go through it in order to be transferred, then that's a way of getting useful work into the robot.
Adding entropy through.
Yeah, there's a spook. And he's moving little boxes. Yay. It's pretty cute, huh? Okay, so this is a molecular walker. And here, so the way this one works is that you actually have to, for every step of it, it's a pretty early molecular robot, because it's not something that you can just set set it going by itself. Basically, you need to manually in a beaker change its chemical conditions on every step to get it to walk. But so like it starts. We can do this again. So we've got this. It starts with sort of the little walker attached here. You got an nitrogen bond there, and then if you change it, if you change its outside to an acid, then you break off this bond here. You make it favorable for a water to attach here and convert it. So now it's free and floating there. So then you're fine with just having this, and then that's interesting. I'm not sure why that works actually. Actually, I think that's actually stochastic. So if you've got something attached here, what I'm hiding here is that all of these are like random processes. So when you put it on the acid, it's you free it from whatever anchor it had, but then it's free to either reattach here or reattach there. So like half the time it'll actually move on to the next one, but half the time it'll actually stay there. There's nothing deciding which way it should go. But you get half of them on each step going to the other one. And then when you change it to like a reduction background, then you can attach this some group on top of here. It's sulfur and some other. I just put R here because it's some sort of molecule up here that I didn't want to draw. But whichever ones have gone forward, that prevents them from ever going back, because you've now capped this one here, and now it's stuck here, and so it can only go forward from here. And then you convert it to acid again. You form this bond here because it can't form that bond here once you're in the oxidative sort of background. And then now you've got the same situation over here as you had over there, and you kind of have to go forward. So you're using your brain as a chemist to decide to systematically have some probability of the molecule going to the next little section of track and block off the previous sections of track that it couldn't get to. And so if you've got this, then it has to end up over there. But it's not really a self-sustaining nanobot, right? Because you couldn't just set this loose in on the ground and have it do anything. At this stage you really have to control it. But for example, in a larger structure, maybe this could be if you're in like an artificial cell, the cell could be dynamically changing its overall environment to make this thing work. It's pretty inefficient, but it's like a proof of concept. Okay, so this one's interesting. This is the Fringer's rotary motor. So how do you get rotational motion in a molecule? It's not as, because if you've just got something like flailing around, you can't just get free energy out of it. Or like free motion out of it. You can't just get perpetual motion going in a circle like this. Anytime you have just like this is kind of called a Brownian ratchet. It's something that if you look up Feynman's lectures on physics, he has a really good section on the Brownian ratchet, which is this idea that maybe you can get useful work out of just thermal motion by having some sort of system where the thermal wobbles are enough to send a ratchet sort of to the next rung. If you imagine do you know what a ratchet is? It's like something where you sort of goes up a slope and then clinks into the next joint, and goes up a slope and clinks into the next joint. So you can kind of move it forward one step and it locks, and move it forward another step and it locks. And there was kind of this problem in thermodynamics of could you get infinite motion out of a ratchet that just uses thermodynamics, because it's easier to go up a ramp and lock into the next spot than it is to come out of that little groove and go back down the ramp. But actually, Feynman shows in his lectures that it's completely symmetrical, that it's as hard for a ratchet to go one way under just thermal motion as it is to go the other way, and it has to be. And you can't get any ratchet the pawl to the next tooth. Ratchet the pawl to the next tooth. Yeah, I don't know the technical terms of ratchets at all. I just know little shapes in my mind. But yeah, so it's impossible to. There have been lots of clever tricks tried to try and get to try and get just like heat energy to move something, right? Like just in a thermal bath where there's not like a high heat and a low heat section of it, the energy is flowing from one to the other. Just take the heat of the universe and use it to do work. And that's something that, like, if you hear people talk about like 0-point energy, these ideas of like, oh, there's so much energy locked in the vacuum, or there's so much energy locked in the heat of the air going around day to day. You know, we can just pull it out and use it to do work, and that's great. No, you can't. It's impossible. It's not that it breaks a law of physics. It's that the law of physics it breaks is literally a counting law. It's just like how numbers work. The second law of thermodynamics isn't really a law of physics. It's just a law of numbers, that there are more ways for something to be disordered than to be ordered. So you need fuel. So here's how this one works. So this is very similar to a ratchet, because what you've got is you've got a system where it's easy to swing around this axis here. If this is a single bond, sometimes it's a single bond and sometimes it's a double bond. And it's easy for it to swing around here and then to sort of thermodynamically jostle. It's kind of a little, is it a pawl? Do we call this a pawl? Anyways, it's a little sort of tab that gets stuck on one side of this ring here, but then it's easier for it to jostle over. And then you could think it could just thermodynamically swing around here, and it's easy to jostle over there. But you need some sort of energy or entropy input for it to prefer to go one way. So what you do is you hit it with you start it as a double bond. Double bond. You hit it with an electron to break that bond. So now it's free to swing. So now it swings around because this thing was already on the other side. And this thing like has a preference to be kind of on the front side here, but on the back side here of this little ring, because you can see it's oriented that way. It's better to be on this side, but it can form a double bond in either position. So once you break the double bond, it would prefer to rotate around here, so it does, and then the double bond reforms, and then And then what happens is ideally you wait for this little tab to thermodynamically jostle over to the other side of this ring, which means that now if you break the double bond again, instead of wanting to go back, it's going to want to go forward again. So you break the double bond again, and then it swings around again, and then reform the double bond, wait for it to jostle over, hit it with another electron, and that way you can use the power of your electrons to actually get circular motion out of this thing and, do some work. So all that for a little. I spent more time on this animation than I've ever spent on animation in a video. So here's another one. This is a Rotaxane information ratchet pump. They go by so fast, don't they? So let's see if we can look at what's going on with this one. Like naively, here's what's going on, and this is why I made this diagram. Is that you have your ring on the Rotaxane. You can think of it as a ring on a wire, and it's got a certain like attraction to low areas and repulsion from high areas. It's like it's like gravity or whatever. So this thing gets stuck in here, and then you do work to lower this barrier down, and maybe this will jostle back here, but there is another barrier over here too. But maybe it'll jostle forward, and then you raise the barrier up again. And now it's stuck here, and once it's stuck there, then it can't go back over this hump. So then you lower this barrier, and it goes back down. But actually, what's really going on, because you're just hitting this thing with light, is that these barriers are getting lowered and raised all the time, just because you're just hitting it with a bunch of light. But because the equilibrium point is down here, right next to this one, it's more likely for the ring to go forward when a barrier gets dropped than for it to find all of its way all the way back to this one and go over it. So there's a preference for when it drops a barrier to go over the next hump than to go back over the previous hump. And so you can pump it forward. This is why it's called an information ratchet, is that it uses the information about. Oh no, I'm wrong about this. It's more interesting than that. So this barrier only gets lowered when the ring is there. It's part of the reaction necessary to lower this particular barrier. So what's actually it's not really a barrier. What it is this.
Barriers free energy expended.
Yeah, I should have watched this first. So your ring here in the real version gets stuck on this. It's a rotaxane. It likes this positive group because there's a bunch of electronegative oxygens in here. Gets trapped there, but it's got this little tab on it, which can be used to, if you hit it with light, to donate an electron here or like hit this thing with an electron that breaks its bond and flips it over, and that's what reduces this barrier. And so you don't. Yeah, I was wrong. You don't just break these barriers all at the same time. You only break the one that's right in front of the ring. So its only option is to go forward, and then when it slides to the next one, this double bond will reform. This barrier will go back up, and now it's here. And its only option is to get hit with another photon here and for it to drop the barrier and go forward. So you can pump this little molecule forward. Like these seem like, I don't know if this is boring for people to hear about, but it's a really difficult problem to figure out how to get linear motion out of molecules being jostled everywhere by the chaos of like room temperature solution and light. Where like how do you get linear motion out of that? And this is an ingenious solution, I think.
Drop to let it pass and then to catch it, go through the door and
Yeah, so there's your
a ratchet nanobot.
it's the most cartoonish version of that, right? Is you can only open the door right in front of the little robot and it goes through. You close the door, and then you open the next door and it has to go through. And you use the information. Yeah, use the information about the location of the thing you're trying to move to determine, like, that itself is part of the process of determining which of these barriers gets lowered. And so it's really the equivalent of like the Maxwell demon that knows, like, if you know this story about Maxwell had this thought experiment about a little demon that could see, that had like full knowledge of the system and could see the fast moving molecules and slow moving molecules in a box. And he had this little experiment about if you have a gate and your demon knows to only let fast molecules go from left to right and only slow molecules go from right to left, then it can use information to separate a thermally like one thermal equilibrium box into a cold section and a warm section, thus breaking the second law of thermodynamics. And what it was found was that on further examination was that if you take into account the entropy of running the daemon, you always come out with like adding entropy to the universe anyways. It's only if you ignore the daemon that you get away with like free negative entropy. But that's what this is doing. There is an information cost. There is like an entropy cost to running this information ratchet, which is the photons you're pouring in. But it uses the same principle. It's the knowledge about where the ring is that allows it to move in a particular direction.
Let's see, you've animated these new
How do you like my robot
gadgets.
moves?
Next, let's see you.
I tried to make him floss, but in Character Animator, I could not figure out how to put the arms both in front and then on the next step behind. So he's not really flossing. He's just doing a cute like wiggle back and forth type thing.
Handle informatics, fam. Nano informatics.
Okay, so now we're into binary switches and stuff. So this is a catenane switch. So a catenane once again is two rings interlocking, and this is one example of a switch that you can hit with different chemicals, and it'll cause it. How does this one work? I maybe we'll see how this one actually works, but I'm not sure at the moment. I don't remember what's the trigger that makes it flip from preferring to be locked in this configuration to this one. I suspect it's something to do with whether these ions are charged or not. But yeah, so you can have a little two-state system essentially. Anytime you have a two-state system, you get the equivalent of a switch, right? So you have a bunch of those. This isn't really chemistry. It's just illustrating how you think about these things. So if people talk about binary, you think of it as just like a string of ones and zeros. What binary actually is, it's it's not ones and zeros, it's ons and offs, right? It's like little switches. Electricity going through, electricity not going through, or whatever, or like upstate, downstate, whatever it is. You've got a two-state system, and the zeros and ones are just keeping track of the states. So here's a little two-state system. So you can use it as switches, and if you have enough of them, you can encode arbitrary binary information.
Switches are the way to data saving.
Yeah, and then it's funny. The thing that I feel about this graphic is that once you get to this point, it's like it switches that intuitive place in my mind where I go, oh, that's binary code. But when it's over here, I can still see it as molecules. So I'm trying to make those jumps between your intuitions.
Switches are the way to data saving. Flipping chemically.
Okay, so this is one that works with changing the medium from the surrounding I don't know, what do you call it? Surrounding medium, whatever, from acid to base. Will preferentially switch which way this thing wants to bond. How does that work? What bond is it breaking? This goes by so fast. So you've got an oxygen here and a nitrogen here. So when it's a base, when it's basic, I think this nitrogen becomes positive, and no. What's going on? It's too fast. Because I probably spent like a day on this little animation. But yeah, the bath, that's what I'm trying to say. Surrounding like bath or solution or solute or whatever you want to call it. When it's basic, this nitrogen is neutral and will prefer to bond with the hydrogen. But when it's acidic, the nitrogen becomes positive, and then it doesn't want to be attracted to the positive hydrogen. But the oxygen, it's not in a state where it's going to become an ion either way. So when the nitrogen doesn't want to bond, it switches over and it goes and bonds instead. So it's another two-state system. Oh yeah, and then you can get this one where there's this little tab on it that you hit it with one color photon. Probably this like UV. I think they hit this one with. This is the photo switchable rotexane switch. It's got two binding sites. This ring will either bind to this ring over here, or just these nitrogens over here. It's fine with either one. But if this tab is kind of in the on position here, it inhibits it from coming over to this one. So it prefers to be over here. But then you can break this double bond with UV and switch that over there, and then this one will jump over and then the ring will jump over to the other state. And then if you want to switch it back, let's see what you do. Oh, I don't know how you switch it back. How do you switch it back? Oh, you got to hit it with one frequency of light. If it's over, so this is another information thing. If it's over, so if this ring is over here, it'll interact with the system such that it accepts one frequency of light. So you hit it with that frequency of light, it flips this switch over to this tab over to here and makes it want to go over there. And then once this is over here, the energy of this system is different because it doesn't have this big complex close to it. So it's absorbing at a different wavelength. So then you hit it with a different wavelength, you can jump it back. You hit it with one color, it goes there. You hit it with another color, it comes back. Suddenly you have a color-dependent photo switch. Oh, and then this one, we're gonna see how this one actually works. So how does it work? You give these two. You give this excess electrons. Sulfur becomes negative ions. So now they want to be around this positive ionic ring complex. So this is probably changing the voltage or changing like the electrochemical properties of the bath. I'm not sure. Either way, you give it some electrons, and these sulfurs accept the electrons, and they now want to be down here around these positive things. This is just a bunch of triple bonded carbons. They don't really care. But if you change the properties so these things want to lose their electrons, they lose their electrons, and now they're not attracted here anymore, and you switch back. Oh, look at this. All right, so that switch that we saw before, this was actually used in this molecular assembler. So you've got this switch that depending on how you change it from acids to bases, it can take this ring over here, right? This is the nitrogen oxygen switch. So here's what you do. You put a little arm on it. Now you take this switch and you attach it to a little arm, and then you've got these two groups over here that can catalyze different reactions. And particularly what they're doing is these are stereoisomers of each other, these little groups, which means that one is a left-handed version of the molecule and the other is the right-handed version of the molecule. So my hands are stereoisomers of each other. They're not the same. You can't overlay them, but they go together like this, right? They're mirror images. And so this little arm is a catalyst that's going to cause some sort of reaction on one of these stereoisomers. And depending on which way you put the switch, you can decide which stereoisomer you generate, because this one will generate left-handed compounds. This one will generate right-handed compounds. You control this little thing with a switch. So let's see. So either you put a base on it. Okay, what is going on here? So base, switch this way, go this way, react with this complex here. Acid, switch over here, go and react with this complex here. Either way, you're hitting it with the Nu minus. I'm not sure what that is. And then, so I think this is like a two-part. This is a two-part reaction. So you would. It's kind of getting hard to see down here, but you do the first part of the reaction on either one of these catalyst sites, and then you can choose to either keep it on that site or have this little arm actually switch over, like you change from base to acid, and you can have it switch over to the other site, so that you can add on the molecules, the atoms on the other part of the molecule in the other direction. This is how you get these different stereoisomers. And then you add some E+. I'm not sure what E+ represents here, but either way, turn that on, and your little molecule falls off. And so here are all four possible stereoisomers of this molecule, because it can be generated by this same switch, depending on which sequence you decide to run. It's pretty cool. Oh, so these are what's going on here. These are some molecular logic gates. So they're controlled chemically. So you have different ions that you let into the solution. In this case, you've got magnesium. It's a magnesium calcium switch. This one's a sodium hydrogen switch, or H+, which is another way of saying acid. This is they're logic gates though. So this is an OR gate. Is this an OR gate? I can't remember what this stands for. This is an AND gate, and okay, we can tell here. So this is an AND gate. So where are the? So this is an OR gate. So let me see if I remember how this works. We've got basically with the OR gate, what you want is that. So what a logic gate is that you have some set of inputs, and you want some combinations of them to produce outputs and some combinations to not produce outputs, right? So the classic ones are, OR is if I give you either the first signal or the second signal, you're going to pass that signal along. So it's like just excited by either one of these, then go through. If you're excited by neither, then do nothing, right? And so in this case, you've got a molecule that requires it requires some sort of metal ion to form a complex with it in order to turn it into a molecule that's capable of being excited by a particular photon and emitting another color photon. If it doesn't have this complex, then it doesn't have. So what'll this do? This will steal some electrons from one of these bonds and probably make it more easily excited in some way. I can't remember exactly how this works. But either way, in this case, this molecule here doesn't care whether it's a calcium or magnesium. It could be either. So whatever you put into the system, as long as you put either one, you're going to get a signal out the other end of photons. So that's an OR gate. This is an inhibition gate, an in gate. So what that means is that it will be triggered if this input is on and this input is off. But if this input is off, it shouldn't trigger anything. If this input is off and this input is on, it won't do anything. So this signal is inhibiting this signal. So here what you got the same sort of thing where, let's see if we can. Yeah, so we need this thing to.
If you need a calculator, how be?
Okay, so in this one, the photon comes in, and generally, what generally happens is it excites an electron here that comes over and equalizes the energy and doesn't really do anything. But here, if the electron is too attracted to this, then there's no electron to excite. So instead, it excites a photon and sends it out. And this one's doing the same thing. If this ring is free, then there are free electrons to send over to this ring when it gets excited. Oh man, I'm getting lost in this. This is way into the weeds. With what these gates are, because I did a lot of reading to put these things together. But generally speaking, you can at least see the inhibition gates. So this hydrogen, if you turn on, this will be like acidity. You turn on protons, they'll attach here. And what does that do? Let's see. Did we show what happens there? I'm not sure. We kept it off, so I don't know what happens when the hydrogen is over there. This is an AND gate, so you need both of these. What an AND gate means is you need both of these signals to be on to do anything. And so it's a very similar mechanism by which normally without this ion, this ring of oxygens would have electrons to donate over here. But and I can't remember where that's. Oh yeah, okay. So I think does this photon ionize an electron? I can't remember. There's too much going on.
That's key, and you get a photon as a reading.
Anyways, these are all different logic gates. So you can imagine that these would be kind of hard to string together. Like what you really want with logic gates is you want to be able to string them together to make like complicated logic circuits. So a basic calculator of some kind will have a bunch of these logic circuits, strung together in a way that like the outputs of one are the inputs of the next one, and then the inputs of the next one, and the next one, etc. So like a basic 4-bit calculator has, I don't know, something like, someone help me on this. It's quite a bit. A 4-bit calculator would be 8 half adders. Each half adder is, I don't know, it's like somewhere between 5 and 10 little gates. So there's a bunch, like to do even basic calculations, you need like dozens of gates at least. So you need them, and you need the outputs of them, their outputs feeding into inputs of the next ones. So these would be a little harder because their input is not the same form as their output. Their input is all chemical, and their output is photonic. So you'd have to find a way of converting that photon signal back into chemical signal, and ideally you'd want to do that in a molecule, not like reading it out with a computer and deciding to send the next signal or something, because that would kind of defeat the purpose of having a nanobot that can just go and exist on its own. But it's baby steps. We're at the very beginning of this field, this nanorobotic stuff, and right now it's just kind of at the level of like building the building blocks. So like a lot of this. That's one of the reasons why it was hard to find a storyline, like a through line with this, because I really feel like this field isn't finished. In fact, I feel like it's just getting started. And right now they're at the stage of like building the Lego blocks with which one can build everything else. And that's all that's really available. And it's just really recently that we're starting to see things like the little stereo-divergent assembler, where you actually take these components and do something functional with them. But we're getting there, and I figured out a way to end the story in the way that I always like best, which is to refer you back to your human body, where this sort of stuff is going on way more complexly than it is in labs.
And you get a photon as a reading.
Plan your nanobot
Okay, so
to be important info scanner nanobot.
Okay, so here is you remember our little this is another Rotaxane.
The reading.
Plan your
I can't remember if this one if I'm hiding that this one is no, this one isn't really an information pump the way that the other ones were. Except it kind of is, because if it starts over here, this ring can't get through to the next zone without first this complicated reaction going on where this little arm sort of folds down and grabs onto the R group that's here on top of this this offshooting ring, and grabs it and puts it on top of itself. And then once it's done that, the blockage is free for this ring to jump over this hump and move on to the next one. And it can still go back, but it's now free to move in these two regions. And now it's free to access this R group over here.
nanobot.
So it's building a protein. These are all amino acids. They're the same things that go into the proteins in your body. And a protein is just a long string of amino acids. So what this is if you can manufacture this molecule in some way where you have this long Rotaxane with these little bulbs on the top, and you peptide bond each amino acid in this sequence, then you have the equivalent of a little assembler that you can put on this end, and it'll happily go along. Well, not happily, stochastically go along, and by the time it gets to the end, it'll have put all of these amino acids in a chain, and there's only one order that it can do it, because it has to pick up this one before it goes to the next one. And then once it gets here, this chain has, like, I'm cheating a little bit here, because really this chain should be like flopping and flying around all over the place. It's not like it gets here and then it folds down in a nice way. But once it gets here, it has some probability of grabbing onto this next one.
Pot and info scan.
And this little sulfur is the thing you should be keeping an eye on, that kind of does the work of once it's close to here, it's catalyzing this reaction. So now it's got these two on, and it's only got one left. So once it gets back here by stochastic crazy motion, it'll have to grab this one or do nothing.
Nanobot.
So you run that all the way to equilibrium, and then what spits out the end here, once it gets off the chain, has to have this sequence in the right order.
Reading and writing coded data that align.
So this is definitely not. This is basically the equivalent of taking a tape of zeros and writing ones to it. It's a very simple machine, but it's also a pretty complicated machine. It's porphyrin epoxidation catalyst thing. It's basically just a sliding catalyst. So I think what's also going on here is that I don't think it's actually as simple as it populates all of these. I think it can slide over all of them anyways, but if you leave it on the chain long enough and let it slide around, it'll only catalyze the regions where it ends up. I think that's all this one really does. And if you ask me how this complicated reaction works with this double bonded oxygen with the R group here and the manganese complex, I cannot remember how this all works. But it does look cool, right? Like, we're starting to get something that looks a bit like a Turing machine, where you've got like a tape and a writing head on the tape. And if you consider each one of these to be zeros, and if you add an oxygen to it to be ones, the NNNN crab. Is that the official name, Jan, or is this what you're talking about? Are we talking organic chemistry? Yeah, man. We're talking organic chemistry.
Coded data that align. Freedom to do as you pro.
So yeah, so this is the idea that you would have. Now these are is this
Program it.
I must have taken it. Yeah, so this is like a concept for a basic Turing machine. It's not like this actually runs and works like a Turing machine, but it's at least like now we've got all the pieces that are possible. So we've got what you need for a Turing machine, which is a universal computer. Like if you can compute something on a computer, you can compute it on a Turing machine. This is named after Alan Turing. Who was like the founder of computer science. And he showed that any computation can be done on this very simple structure that has a data tape with, I think he did it with a few symbols, but we've proven now that it's possible to do it just with two symbols, 0 and 1. You have some sort of head, like read-write head, that can read the state of the tape and send that information to the little machine up here. And it can also choose to write a 1 or a 0 in response to what the state of this tape is. And then you have some sort of multiple state machine up here that can be in several different states. And depending on which state it's in, that determines whether a 0 in here becomes a 1, or a 1 in here stays a 1, or a 1 in here becomes a 0, etc. And that's all you need for universal computation. So we now have examples of data tapes and read-write heads and multiple state machines that you can like put together and start to build something that looks like a Turing machine. Now, to get it precise, the big problem with computation down at this scale is once again just the randomness of everything, that you're being buffeted all the time by hurricane force thermal motion, and it's unclear to me whether this could ever turn into something stable. It depends how robust you can make it. Like even DNA computation. DNA has evolved for a very long time to become like a very a version of this, because our body has a version of this, right? Like your DNA is the data tape, and your ribosome is the it's not really computation, because there's no read-write mechanism for DNA usually. Like there's little things like CRISPR and stuff. So your body mostly just has the data tape and the read head that then goes out and makes proteins, and those proteins will eventually go back and copy the whole tape. But it relies on random mutations to change the state of the tape. Like it's not like a computer that you can choose which mutation to make and when. Most of the time. Now it's possible that CRISPR is only the first of a great number of such devices that we'll uncover, and we'll eventually come to see DNA more like a Turing machine than we do now. But that's kind of the state of the art at the moment. But yeah, this is how your body works. But it's hard to get DNA stable. Like that's why it's got this interlocking grid and it's held by a backbone structure, because even just the regular like thermal forces are enough to jostle things around and keep changing your 1s to 0s without you wanting them to. Not to mention cosmic rays and such.
A Turing automatic, gamut nanobot.
So I'm just making the point that look, none of this is new. Our bodies don't do this on such a small scale, but we have examples of all these machines, and they pretty much work in the same way. So here, for example, is a rotary motor. It's this ATP synthase inside a mitochondrion that's taking in. I believe this is a proton pump, so it's using proton. I think that's right. Yeah, it's using a proton gradient. So this one's using an electron gradient. There's electrons coming in. This one's using protons coming in to do basically the same sort of ratchet mechanism that rotates the pump, and then on every rotation, an ATP will come out, and that's how like ADP and phosphor group comes in, ATP comes out, fueled by this proton gradient, the same as this is fueled by electrons. And then here's our little molecular walker from before. These are kinesin and dynein, which are two little walkers that walk along your microtubules inside your cells and help like pull your pull your chromosomes apart when it's time for mitosis, and also like take your cell and split it into two for mitosis, and it does a whole bunch of things like that. Like the cytoskeleton, can change the whole structure of a white blood cell so it can flatten and slide through your blood vessels and stuff. All those dynamic changes of cells are caused by like that motion needs to be generated by something, and it's generated by these little walking proteins, which are fueled by ATP, but they have a very similar like entropy. Like conceptually a very similar like entropy equations to what's going on right here. You've got 2 feet down. You make one thing happen for 1 foot to detach. It flails around. It might attach here, but if it attaches over here, there's an energetically favorable configuration change that keeps it there. And then you have to hit it with another ATP to get the next foot to release and maybe go forward. And because of that, you can keep it away from equilibrium and keep it walking. I'm talking fast because it's 4:43, man.
Doesn't that look like
And here's our, this is what I was saying before. Our data tape is our DNA.
Doesn't that look like
And then the equivalent of here's our Rotaxane molecular assembler from before. Here, what I've got, our data tape in this case is DNA. We've changed the data tape here to be this Rotaxane one, and this is RNA polymerase. It's taking your DNA and converting it into an RNA string, and then this RNA string will go out and be converted by a ribosome into proteins, which is closer to this really, because this is assembling a protein. But your ribosome is also much more complicated because it's not just taking molecules and putting them in order. It's converting the code of RNA into a totally different code of proteins. Yeah. Look at that. This is all going, all this crazy DNA replication and these Okazaki fragments getting spooled around and put in opposite directions and all that. This is all like fundamentally it's the same little like entropy relations that I was talking about, back here, with fuel going in and waste going out, and stochastic motion being used in concordance with the information of where something is, to cause motion in a particular direction. That's like, it's what your body is doing all over the place in every one of these. So I thought that was pretty cool. And just like, look at that. It's like robotic. These are your microtubules. They probably don't assemble that cleanly. These little tubulin structures, but that is how they. This is sort of the super highway of the cells. And then you've got your little walkers that walk along them. But this is what I was talking about, like these animations where they walk so nicely. That's not really accurate. It's much more jostling.
Working in concert as a replica of a lie.
Oh yeah, there goes the kinesin and dynein going down the microtubules. This is during mitosis, right? So you've got like your chromosomes have all come together in pairs at the center of the cell, and then there's actually a signal from walkers. This Veritasium made a great video about this, that I'm using the same animations. There's these little walkers that are all triggered by a chemical signal, and they walk along the microtubules. And when they get here, they trigger the other walkers to walk back along here, and pull the chromosomes with them. And that's how you get the chromosomes separating down the middle of the cell and dividing nicely geographically into two cells.
A replica of a lie.
There they go.
I try to be more than it, though sentient and organic. I am a nanobot.
So now we're like, this last thing was just, I wanted to bring it back to that beginning. So remember that plan a nanobot, map out the molecules to span a nanobot. So the skeleton, here's the skeletal pieces. And your skeletal pieces in your cells. And then the movement pieces, motors, muscles of the nanobot, these motors, and the movement pieces of cells. So we're all bringing it all together.
I am a nanobot.
And then the neural structure is the logic processing of little molecules, and the logic processing of human cells, and it all comes together in a nice, a nice coherent something or other.
I am a nanobot.
Hey, music. And there we go. Okay, we're not gonna watch the end screen because we don't have time, and it's I don't care too much about end screens. So yeah, thanks for sticking around for this one. That animation took a dreadfully long time to do. I had never done like 3D animation in After Effects before. It's not really set up for it. It is. It's definitely set up for it, but it was just, the amount of, and luckily I was able to find some good scripts that helped me. There's this great one called Duik, D-U-I-K, that's really good for rigging within After Effects. So you can take a whole bunch of little balls and sticks and attach them together and then like move one end and they'll all kind of move nicely. Because if you want to try to do animations like this in any sort of computer program, you want to do you don't want to do animation with like keyframes where you have to keep all of your I don't know. This is real shop talk, but look up like how to properly rig a puppet so that you can you can move one bit of it and a whole bunch of other joints will move kind of passively, because if you try to do it all like naively with the tools that are within these programs, which is keyframing, it's never going to look natural. So yeah, there's my tip for you animators out there. I don't know if I'll ever do a video as complicated as this again. It was nice that I had funding for it, because it just like, months of animation on that one. That was where all of the time was spent in this one, because the song is mostly loops, right? Doom, ba-da-dum-ba. Like I can build it on this looper in like 5 minutes. The song's not the difficult part, but the visuals, whew, and the research. Anyways, I don't think Catherine is saying we should do this daily discussion tomorrow, and I think I'm actually gonna listen to her.